You didn't ask for it, you didn't expect it, but it happened. They passed over you, they didn't pick you. You gave your best and it still wasn't enough for them. The invitation never came, the call never returned. And in that moment, when you were left standing outside the circle, watching others be celebrated while you were forgotten, you felt invisible, like your presence didn't matter, like your name had been erased, like maybe something was wrong with you, but just because people overlooked you doesn't mean God did. Just because man rejected you doesn't mean heaven revoked your calling. You were rejected, but you are still chosen. God doesn't need man's approval to validate your assignment. He doesn't wait for someone else to see your worth before he uses you. In fact, he often lets people miss you on purpose. He lets them walk past you. He lets them underestimate you, not to punish you, but to preserve you. Because if they had chosen you, they would have tried to control you. If they had affirmed you, you might have built your identity on their acceptance instead of his anointing. So yes, it hurt. You questioned your value. You asked if you were doing something wrong, but rejection doesn't mean disqualified. It means set apart. It means hidden for a higher purpose. Sometimes God lets people dismiss you so you'll finally listen to him. So you'll stop looking for open arms and start listening for open heaven. So you'll stop begging for man's approval and start walking in God's authority. David wasn't invited to the ceremony. Samuel came to anoint the next king, and David didn't even make the lineup. His own father didn't call his name, but God did. While others looked at status, God looked at the heart. And when the prophet finally asked, "Is there anyone else?" they had to go find the one they left in the field, the rejected one, the forgotten one, the chosen one. That's how God works. He finds those the world ignores. He raises up those the crowd pushed down. He calls those who didn't fit in, who didn't measure up, who didn't check the boxes. Because your calling is not based on popularity, it's based on purpose. So if you've been rejected, take heart. If they walked away, let them. If they couldn't see you, they weren't meant to cover you. God's choosing doesn't require human confirmation. You're still anointed, you're still called, you're still part of the plan. They may have overlooked you, but God marked you, and his mark matters more than their applause. You were rejected by man, but you were handpicked by God, and that means your story is just beginning. Some people left and it broke your heart. They walked away without warning. The connection faded, the conversation stopped, you reached out and they didn't reach back, and you took it personally. You questioned your worth, you blamed yourself, you thought, maybe if I had done more, maybe if I had been better. But the truth is, it wasn't punishment, it was positioning. Not everyone can go with you, and God made sure of it. Some rejections weren't the enemy, they were God. He removed certain people, not because they were bad, but because they weren't built to carry what's coming next. They were part of your past, but they're not meant to walk into your promise. And if you had kept holding on, you would have missed your alignment trying to preserve attachment. God knows who fits your future. He knows the weight of your calling. He knows the road you're about to walk. And sometimes his mercy is separation, not because he wants you alone, but because he's preparing something sacred. Because some people can't handle the version of you that's emerging. They were drawn to who you were, not who you're becoming. And if they stayed, they would have stifled what God was trying to unlock You saw it as abandonment, but it was alignment, a divine pruning, a holy severing, God clearing the space so your roots could grow deeper. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt like loss, but you don't realize how much dead weight you were carrying until God lifts it off your shoulders. Look at Abraham. God told him, leave your country, your people, and your father's house. In other words, you can't take everyone with you. The promise was personal. The instruction was specific, and the journey required separation, because sometimes obedience means walking forward alone before God sends the right ones to walk beside you. The ones who left didn't ruin your story. They made room for it. They didn't cancel your purpose. They cleared the path for it. And just because someone was there at the start doesn't mean they're assigned to the finish. This next season requires clarity. It requires strength. It requires focus. And not everyone can carry that with you. So stop mourning the ones who couldn't stay. Stop chasing what God has already removed. What you thought was rejection was really protection. What you called loss was actually leverage. He was lifting you. He was aligning you. He was positioning you for something greater. Let them go. Bless them, release them, because your journey is not on pause, it's in motion. And what God is preparing for you requires room to grow. Not everyone can go with you, and that's not rejection, that's alignment. They told you no, they shut the door, they passed you over, shut you out, walked past your name like it meant nothing. And for a moment you believed them. You thought their no meant the dream was over. You assumed the assignment had expired because they didn't open the door for you. But man's no is not God's stop. Their refusal does not cancel His word. God doesn't need permission to fulfill His promise. He doesn't require man's yes to move in power. In fact, some of the greatest moments of destiny were birthed in the middle of human rejection. Joseph didn't need his brother's approval to get to the palace. David didn't need his father's validation to be anointed king. Jesus didn't need the Pharisees to recognize him to fulfill his mission. Because when heaven has spoken, earth cannot silence it. Just because they didn't see you doesn't mean you're not seen. Just because they said no doesn't mean the door is closed forever. It might just mean that God is redirecting your steps. Maybe you were about to walk through a door too small for your calling. Maybe that connection would have compromised your integrity. Maybe their yes would have become your ceiling. So God let them say no, not to stop you, but to set you free. Man's rejection often reveals God's redirection. It's a shift, not a shutdown. It's God saying, that's not your door because I've prepared something better. You thought you needed their opportunity, their platform, their affirmation. But what you really needed was God's direction. And He's not leading you backward, He's leading you around. There are moments when the closed door is actually a divine gift. Because if it had opened, you would have settled. You would have built your identity around access that was never supposed to define you. You would have poured yourself into a place that could never contain what God put inside of you. So He let the door slam shut to remind you, you're called by me, not them. The assignment is still alive. The calling hasn't changed. The promise hasn't expired. And even if every person around you says it can't happen, God's word still stands. Their no might delay your path, but it cannot derail your purpose. Because when God says go, no man can stop it. When God says yes, no committee, no title, no rejection letter can override His plan. So lift your head, wipe the disappointment from your heart. Their no wasn't the end, it was the reroute. The mission isn't canceled, it's being redirected. And where God is taking you, you won't need their endorsement. You'll just need your obedience. David wasn't even invited. The prophet showed up to anoint the next king, and Jesse brought out all his sons except David. He lined them up, confident the next ruler stood among them. But David, he was left in the field tending sheep, overlooked, forgotten, not even considered. His own father didn't see the potential in him. His own family didn't believe in him, but God did, because when heaven selects you, man's opinion becomes irrelevant. David was left out, but he was still chosen. He wasn't in the room, but he was still in God's plan. And that moment, the rejection, the exclusion, the absence, was not disqualification, it was preparation. Because while others were dressing up for appearances, David was being developed in the unseen. He was learning how to fight lions and bears. He was cultivating faith in obscurity, and what looked like being left behind was actually God getting him ready. Rejection didn't ruin him. It refined him. God often hides greatness before he reveals it, because what's birthed in private carries authority in public. And when God finally told Samuel, the one you're looking for isn't here, Jesse had to admit, there's still the youngest, the one he didn't even bother to mention, the one he left out. And that's when you realize being overlooked by man is often the clearest sign that God is up to something. He lets people ignore you so they can't take credit when he elevates you. He lets them count you out so that when he calls you forward, there's no question. This was God, not influence, not favoritism, not connections, just the hand of the Lord resting on someone who didn't need the room to validate them. David walked into the room last, but he left anointed, because favor doesn't follow popularity, it follows purpose. And some of you have been weeping over rooms that never called your name, over people who never saw your worth, but God was never building your future on their recognition. He was preparing you for something they couldn't even comprehend. Don't resent the rejection. Don't despise the season of being unseen. That field where no one clapped, no one noticed, no one called, is where kings are made. That place where you've been faithful in silence is the very place God will use as the foundation for your elevation. So stop chasing rooms God didn't invite you to. Stop begging for seats at tables God never built for you. If you were left out, it's because God was setting you apart. And when it's your time, He'll call you by name, because like David, you were never forgotten. You were just hidden for the right moment. And when that moment comes, no one will be able to deny you were chosen all along. Rejection has a way of sinking into your soul. It doesn't just hit your mind, it hits your identity. You start to question everything. Was I ever good enough? Did I miss God? Maybe I'm not called after all. You try to shake it, but it lingers. The silence, the closed door, the unanswered prayer. You gave your best and still got told no. You showed up with an open heart and got walked over. And in that moment, rejection starts to sound a lot like failure. But rejection is not failure. It's not the end of your story. It's not evidence that you're broken or unworthy. It's a sign that God is doing something different. Not less, not smaller, just different. He's rerouting you, not disqualifying you. But the enemy will whisper lies in the waiting. He'll use that silence to plant doubt. He'll tell you that the door closed because you weren't enough, that you missed your shot, that your voice doesn't matter. And if you're not careful, you'll agree with him. You'll internalize the no and wear it like a label, but what man calls rejection, God calls redirection. What felt like a loss was actually a shift. It's not that you weren't called, it's that God was calling you somewhere else. somewhere higher, somewhere deeper, and sometimes that path begins with a no you didn't see coming. Jesus was rejected too, not just by strangers, but by his own people. The ones he came to save didn't recognize him. They questioned his authority, doubted his identity, mocked his mission. But their rejection didn't cancel his assignment, it confirmed it. Because when you're truly walking in purpose, rejection is part of the process. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're being refined for something right. God will allow rejection to break your dependence on approval. He'll let the door close to show you where your identity really stands. Not in their acceptance, not in their applause, but in his voice, his hand, his choosing, because when he affirms you, it doesn't matter who denies you. So no, you didn't fail, you didn't fall short, you didn't miss it. You're still anointed, still assigned, still in the hands of a God who knows exactly where he's taking you. And this rejection, it's not your end, it's just a plot twist, a turning point, a sacred detour designed to pull you closer, stretch your faith, and anchor your confidence, not in open doors, but in the one who opens them. You're not forgotten, you're not discarded, you're not disqualified, you're just being redirected. And when the dust settles, you'll realize the very thing that made you question your worth was the moment God was reaffirming your calling. Rejection didn't destroy you, it revealed you. There's something about a closed door that makes you stop and ask the hard questions, not the surface level ones, not the ones you ask to feel better, but the soul-searching kind. Was I really called to this, or was I chasing it because I thought it looked right? Was it purpose? Or was it pressure? Rejection has a way of cutting through the noise. It peels back the layers of performance, pride, and expectation. And what you thought was a setback becomes the mirror that reveals your true motives. Because if you're honest, some of what you were pursuing wasn't born in prayer, it was born in pressure. It came from the desire to prove something, to fix something, to feel valuable. That platform, that position, that relationship, it looked good, it sounded right, but deep down it wasn't God's best. It was your plan dressed in religious language, and God, in his mercy, closed the door, not to crush your dreams, but to protect your destiny. Because God doesn't just bless what you do, he blesses what's aligned. And when your desire outruns your discernment, rejection becomes a holy pause, a divine moment to recalibrate, to step back and ask God, what did you actually call me to do? When Samuel mourned over Saul, God said, "How long will you grieve over what I've rejected?" Saul was a door God closed, but Samuel was still attached. And that's where many people get stuck. Grieve in a door God used to grow you, but never intended you to stay behind. Sometimes rejection is God removing what you would have stayed loyal to for too long. Sometimes it's not about the door, it's about the direction. God will use closed doors to purify your calling, to strip away the parts of your ambition that don't belong in your assignment. He'll let rejection refine your vision until what you're chasing isn't status, it's surrender, not recognition, but obedience. And in that clarity, you'll find peace, because now you're no longer pursuing what feels good, you're pursuing what is God. You'll stop trying to fit into rooms that shrink you. You'll stop begging for yeses that were never supposed to be yours. You'll realize that calling isn't proven by access, it's proven by alignment. And sometimes it takes a slam door to show you the difference. So no, the rejection didn't break you, It saved you. It forced you back to the feet of the one who called you in the first place. And there, in the quiet, he reminded you, you don't need every door, you just need mine. And when he opens it, no man can shut it. Rejection didn't derail your calling, it clarified it. They walked away, and it hurt. Not just because they left, but because of how they left, without closure, without care, without explanation. You gave your time, your heart, your effort, and in return, you were met with silence. And for a moment, you wondered if you were the problem. If maybe you weren't enough. If what they walked away from was never worth anything to begin with. But hear this, God never walks away from what he values. And just because they didn't see your worth doesn't mean God didn't. What they walked away from, God will redeem. Every tear, every heartbreak, every unanswered question, he saw it. And he is not a God who wastes pain. He collects it, he transforms it. He turns broken pieces into purpose. You didn't lose something valuable. They did. They walked away from favor, from faithfulness, from a future that was drenched in potential. And that's not your loss to carry. Sometimes rejection is really redirection with redemption attached. God allowed them to leave so he could build without their interference. Because not everyone can handle what he's about to do in your life. Some people only saw the seed, not knowing you were about to grow into something they couldn't cover. So he let them go, not because he was punishing you, but because he was protecting your promise. They saw ordinary, but God sees oil. They saw flaws, but God sees fire. And when he redeems, he doesn't just replace, he restores. He doesn't just give you something new, he gives you something greater, the kind of blessing that makes you look back and thank him for the closed door, the kind of healing that makes you realize that goodbye was necessary. Look at Ruth. She lost her husband. She buried her future. She had every reason to give up and stay stuck, but she followed Naomi into a land she didn't know, with nothing but a broken heart and quiet hope. And there, in the unfamiliar, God redeemed the story. Boaz saw what was left behind and honored what others overlooked. That's what God does. He redeems what people walked away from. He brings purpose out of pain, beauty from ashes, glory from grief. So don't chase what left. Don't beg for what abandoned you. Don't question your worth because of their absence. Instead, lift your head, because what they rejected, heaven is about to raise up. What they overlooked, God is about to anoint. And the very thing they walked away from is the very thing God will use to bless nations. You are not forgotten. You are not discarded. You are not damaged. You are being redeemed. And when God redeems a thing, he writes a story so powerful that even the pain becomes a testimony. They walked away, but God stayed. And he's about to prove that he's the only one who ever needed to say yes. Divine direction doesn't always feel divine. Sometimes it feels like abandonment, like silence, like betrayal. You prayed for guidance and instead you got a closed door. You asked for favor and you were met with rejection. You wanted clarity, but all you got was chaos. And somewhere in that tension, the enemy whispered, God left you, but he lied. Because what feels like rejection is often God's redirection in disguise. Faith doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always look like open heavens and clear paths. Sometimes faith walks through locked doors and unanswered prayers. Sometimes divine direction shows up as the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, the relationship that didn't work, the dream that fell apart. But God's hand was in it all, not to hurt you, but to reroute you. Think about Elijah. After calling down fire from heaven, he ran into a cave, feeling abandoned and afraid. He thought it was over. He thought God had forgotten him. But in that cave, God whispered, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still small voice, because divine direction doesn't always shake the ground. It often shifts the heart. And what you feel doesn't always match what God is doing. Feelings are real, but they're not always true. You feel forgotten, but God is forming you. You feel rejected, but God is rerouting you. You feel like it's falling apart, but God is putting it together in a way you couldn't see. Divine direction is rarely comfortable. It disrupts your plans to protect your purpose. And if you only follow God when it feels good, you'll miss the miracle hiding behind what felt like loss. Jesus hung on a cross, beaten and bleeding, and in that moment it didn't look like deliverance, it looked like defeat. The crowd mocked, the sky grew dark, his own disciples scattered. But that wasn't abandonment, that was redemption unfolding, because divine direction doesn't come wrapped in comfort, it comes wrapped in purpose, and purpose always costs something. So stop judging your season by how it feels. Stop measuring God's faithfulness by the presence of pain. Just because it hurts doesn't mean it's not holy. Just because it stings doesn't mean He's not steering you. Sometimes the most divine moments are the ones that break your heart just enough to realign it. God's direction is not always revealed in the spotlight. It's often hidden in what others called a failure, but heaven never makes a mistake, and one day you'll look back and realize the closed door wasn't rejection. It was protection. It was precision. It was the exact turn you needed to arrive at the place God always planned. You're not abandoned. You're being aligned. And even if it doesn't feel divine right now, trust this. God's fingerprints are all over the path you're walking. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like loss, like betrayal, like the floor caved in while you were still standing. The breakup knocked the breath out of you. The layoff bruised your confidence. The fallout made you question who you could trust again. You were left wondering, God, why would you allow this? But what you saw as heartbreak, God saw as release. What felt like punishment was actually positioning. He didn't allow it to destroy you. He allowed it to free you. Some chains don't look like chains. Some of them look like comfort, like stability, like familiarity. You stayed because it felt safe, even if it was slowly suffocating your purpose. And so God, in His mercy, didn't wait for you to walk away. He allowed the thing to collapse because He loved you too much to let you settle there. He could see what you couldn't. That the thing you were fighting to hold on to was the very thing holding you back. The relationship that ended wasn't rejection, it was redirection. You thought you lost a future, but God was making space for destiny. That job that let you go, it wasn't the end of provision, it was the beginning of promotion. That fallout that ripped the friendship apart, it wasn't betrayal, it was God exposing what couldn't go with you into the next season. You were mourning over what God was trying to move you out of. Sometimes deliverance doesn't come with applause, it comes with heartbreak. Sometimes the greatest blessings start with the deepest breaks. And while you're crying over what left, heaven is rejoicing over what was released, because what you called loss, God called launch. What you called devastation, He called deliverance. Look at Paul and Silas in prison, chains on their hands, doors locked shut. It looked like defeat. But when they worshiped, God sent an earthquake, not to destroy the prison, but to shake it open. And everyone's chains fell off. Sometimes God shakes your life, not to ruin it, but to free it. Sometimes the fallout is the setup for freedom. You may not understand it now. It might still sting. You might still be grieving, but trust this. One day you'll look back and thank God He let it fall apart. You'll thank Him for the doors He closed, the people He removed, the plans He interrupted, because in the breaking He was building. In the loss, He was leading. In the pain, He was protecting. You didn't lose, you were liberated, and though it didn't feel like freedom at first, you're about to step into something that makes it all make sense. God didn't allow it to hurt you. He allowed it to free you, and freedom always costs something, but it always leads to something better. They didn't just reject you, they underestimated you. They saw your potential, and instead of celebrating it, they tried to silence it. They threw you aside, walked away, spoke against you, and expected you to disappear. But what they didn't know was that rejection doesn't cancel God's plan. It activates it. Because when people walk out, heaven steps in, and what they threw in a pit, God is about to place in a palace. Joseph's own brothers couldn't see the call on his life. They were too familiar with him to honor the anointing on him. So they stripped his coat but couldn't touch his calling. They thought that throwing him into a hole would bury the dream. But you can't bury what God intends to resurrect. What looked like the end was the beginning of divine elevation, because God doesn't just redeem the story, He lets the same ones who rejected you witness the redemption. It's not about revenge, it's not about pride, it's about glory. God elevates His children in the sight of those who doubted them, not to shame them, but to reveal His hand, because when He promotes you in public after you were rejected in private, no one can deny it was Him. When Joseph stood before his brothers years later, he didn't just have a title, he had testimony. The pit didn't kill him, the prison didn't stop him, and the betrayal didn't break him, it positioned him. You don't have to prove anything, you don't have to clap back, you don't have to make them understand your worth. Just stay faithful, keep moving forward, because while they're watching from the sidelines, God is writing the next chapter of your story. And this time it won't be hidden, it will be undeniable, visible, unstoppable. The ones who counted you out will have no choice but to see what God is doing in your life. David was overlooked by his father, ignored by his brothers. But when it was time to fight Goliath, it wasn't the ones in armor that God used. It was the shepherd boy no one invited to the battle. God specializes in elevating the rejected, in promoting the overlooked, in using the unlikely. And when He does it, nobody gets the credit but Him. So don't be bitter. Be ready. Because the same crowd that mocked you will witness the miracle. The same people who shut the door will watch God open another. The same voices that doubted your call will echo your name in awe. And it won't be because of who you are, it'll be because of who your God is. Let them reject you. Let them walk away. Let them doubt. Because in just a little while they'll see that the pit was never your prison, it was your platform. And what they meant for evil, God is about to use for glory. Rejection didn't just break you, it built you. It didn't just wound your heart, it trained your spirit, because every time they walked away, every time they overlooked you, every time the door slammed shut, something inside of you was being forged, not in comfort, but in fire, not in applause, but in silence, not in validation, but in isolation. And now you're stronger, not because everything went right, but because everything went wrong and you still didn't quit. There's a kind of strength that can't be learned in the spotlight. It's the kind you only gain when everything you thought would work doesn't. When people you counted on suddenly vanish. when the plan falls apart and the only thing you're left with is God's voice in the dark whispering, "Keep going." That kind of strength doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from being rejected and refusing to be defined by it. You needed that breaking. As painful as it was preparation. God was shaping your endurance. He was stretching your faith. He was building the kind of character that doesn't collapse when the weight of the assignment increases, because what's coming next will require more than just gifting. It will require grit. It will demand discernment, humility, resilience. And rejection gave you all three. Joseph didn't walk into Pharaoh's court soft. He walked in with scars, with wisdom, with a maturity that could only be developed through betrayal. If he had gone straight from the dream to the throne, he wouldn't have survived the pressure. But the pit built something in him. The prison developed something in him. And every rejection prepared him for responsibility. You've cried, you've questioned, you've wrestled with God in the lonely places, asking Him why He let them hurt you like that. But what you didn't see then was that He wasn't punishing you, He was processing you. And the pain wasn't random, it was strategic. He allowed the rejection so He could remove the crutches you were leaning on. He let it sting so it could strengthen. The version of you that will step into the next season is not the same version that got rejected. That old you would have cracked under pressure. That old you needed too much approval. But now you've been tried by fire. You've been purified in private, and you're ready. Not because everything's perfect, but because you've been prepared. Rejection taught you how to pray when no one was clapping. It taught you how to move when no one was watching. It taught you how to trust God when everything else was stripped away. And that strength, that's what will carry you into purpose. So don't despise the rejection. It built what applause never could. At first, it looked like chaos, one no after another. Doors you prayed would open slammed shut. Relationships you thought would last forever suddenly vanished. Opportunities you were sure were sent from heaven dissolved into nothing. You didn't understand. You begged God for clarity, for peace, for just one reason why the rejection kept coming. But now, on the other side, you can finally see it. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't coincidence. It was the roadmap. Every rejection was a redirection. Every goodbye was a guidepost. Every disappointment was a divine signal that God was steering you away from what was good so He could lead you into what was God. And now, standing in the place He prepared, you realize something deep in your spirit. It had to happen this way. If they hadn't walked away, you would have stayed stuck. If that door hadn't closed, you would have settled. If the plan hadn't unraveled, you would have missed the miracle. Rejection wasn't just something you survived, it was the very thing that saved you. Because the path to purpose is rarely straight. It winds through heartbreak, through detours, through seasons that make no sense until you look back and trace the hand of God through every twist. Joseph didn't ask to be thrown in a pit or sold as a slave or locked in a prison, but every painful stop was part of the process. Every closed door was pushing him closer to the palace, and when he finally stood in the place God destined, he didn't just see the blessing, he saw the blueprint. What his brothers meant for evil, God used for elevation. What looked like rejection was the route to rulership. And that's your story too. You weren't buried, you were planted. Every no was necessary, every rejection was sacred. Because it shaped you, it refined you, it aligned you with heaven's timing. And now you're not walking in confusion, you're walking in confirmation. The very things you once questioned, you now thank God for. that person who left, that door that shut, that moment that broke your heart, it was all part of it. Without it, you wouldn't have the wisdom you carry. You wouldn't have the strength you've built. You wouldn't have the peace you now walk in. What felt like abandonment was actually assignment. What felt like loss was leading you to life. So stop mourning what didn't work. Stop questioning who didn't stay, because what left had to leave. What closed had to close, and what broke had to break. Not to destroy you, but to direct you. Rejection wasn't the end of the story. It was how God wrote the map. Now you see it clearly. Rejection wasn't a detour, it was divine direction, and this is what it was all leading to.